So I'm Elizabeth. I'm in the doctoral program at SCARP. And in this final presentation, I will open up the question of how this international framework, this voluntary framework, must be said, that Canada signed on to at the Habitat III conference, could be a catalyst in our planning for the future of Canadian communities, both urban and rural. So the new urban agenda, as you've heard, is a truly visionary document developed through such an extensive and multi-layered participatory process that one could actually consider it crowdsourced. It outlines a shared vision for a better and more sustainable future for human settlements. In the word of Joanne Clos, Secretary General of the Habitat III Conference, it represents a paradigm shift based on the science of cities. On a practical level, the new urban agenda establishes a three-legged approach to sustainable urban development comprising local fiscal systems, emphasizing the local, urban planning, and basic services and infrastructure. On an aspiration level, it is based on core ideas of democratic development, equity in the face of globalization, and safety and security for all, regardless of gender, age, or other difference. It is fundamentally grounded in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Point 11 from the New Urban Agenda states, we share a vision of cities for all, referring to the equal use and enjoyment of cities and human settlements, seeking to promote inclusivity and ensure that all inhabitants of present and future generations, without discrimination of any kind, are able to inhabit and produce just, safe, healthy, accessible, affordable, resilient, and sustainable cities and human settlements to foster prosperity and quality of life for all. And on this slide, you see in this central point in the agenda that oblique reference to the right to the city. If you're new to this, I really encourage you to scan that 175-point New Urban Agenda document. It's now online in a graphically enhanced format to get a sense of the deep earnestness and commitment that managed to survive the editing of input from thousands and thousands, including local and national governments, civil society organizations, and some 58,000 networks. The aspirations in the new urban agenda will feel completely familiar to Canadian planners. The values are consistent with the aspirational language that we find in many official community plans and other policy documents of Canadian communities, and also in the vision and mission statements of civil society organizations that advocate for social justice goals and often partner with local governments on implementation of progressive agendas. What we do not have is an expression of those values and aspirations within a national urban vision or policy. So, what is a national urban policy? Internationally, a national urban policy is considered a basic instrument for the implementation of the new urban agenda and the city-related Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals that Penny referred to. There is still a lot of debate about how to define a national urban policy. However, there is agreement on the key tenets. It needs to offer a unifying vision for urban development within a country. It needs to serve to identify policies and programs that overline or undermine each other so that those problems can be addressed. And they need to establish a framework that empowers cities to implement and that incentivizes investment in design solutions that align with priorities that are articulated in the national policy. As to why a national urban policy, the intention is not for the national government to impose a top-down plan for cities to implement. On the contrary, the intention is to give cities a seat at the table in the development of a national urban policy and to reinforce their key role in solving national and global challenges. After all, as we know, cities are where most of the population now lives. And as Joanne Clos underlines in every time he speaks about national urban policies, he points out that cities are the site where the impacts of poorly functioning policies created by senior governments play out, forcing cities to deal with the impacts without either adequate resources or the ability to modify those policies. Examples are health, income redistribution, education, and employment standards. Also, cities are generally socially more progressive, as you've heard from earlier presenters, than senior levels of government, leading in the adoption of policies that are consistent with values of the New Urban Agenda, such as inclusion, sanctuary, decarbonization, climate change mitigation, and even living wage. Without prescribing a set of solutions, these national urban policies should provide cities with the capacity and resources to achieve the national social, economic, and environmental goals expressed in the national urban policy. The diversity and primacy of local context is acknowledged constantly. It is understood that there's no template that fits all countries, and certainly no prescriptive solutions that fit all communities within a country. It is also stressed that the process is actually more important than the outcome, the bringing together of key players to create a common vision and work through tough challenges together. For example, Paraguay collaboratively established their national urban policy, and then their government set up a national habitat committee that involves 67 institutions from different sectors and also levels of government, including the key housing and finance ministries, as well as cities and local stakeholders, to continue the urban conversation as part of the implementation and monitoring. Many countries have begun the process to develop a national urban policy, often working with the framework and guides developed by UN Habitat and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or the OECD. Some have completed them and moved on to implementation. Of 35 member countries in the OECD, to which Canada, of course, belongs, about 40 are considered to have at least partial elements of a national urban policy, including, interestingly, the United States. However, Canada is not one of those. 15 of member countries have now an explicit national policy, including Australia, France, Germany, Hungary, Mexico, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Spain, and Portugal. 2 international conferences have been held to bring countries together to share experience and learning in creating national urban policies. These have been organized by UN Habitat together with OECD and the Cities Alliance. This year's conference in Paris was attended by representatives of countries and cities from all continents for 4 days of panels, workshops, and study tours. But what about Canada? In federal systems like Canada's, where cities fall constitutionally under provincial jurisdiction, creating a national urban policy is a challenge. However, in spite of that, the federal government has been involved in cities pretty consistently since World War II, particularly in housing and in the infrastructure sector, through CMHC and Infrastructure Canada. It's worked variously with the provinces and with FCM. There have also been institutional innovations such as the ones highlighted here. And it's interesting to note that the 2001 Prime Minister Caucus Task Force on Urban Issues recommended that Canada establish a national urban strategy, a long-term funding stream for affordable housing, transit and infrastructure, and also an urban ministry. So today we have a progressive government in Ottawa crafting national policy on issues of critical importance to cities, including housing, poverty reduction, and infrastructure and transit financing. This federal interest is welcome and appreciated. However, it remains sectoral rather than holistic. So I will end this presentation with a question for planners. Is there value in starting a conversation about a national urban policy for Canada? We would love to hear from you in the discussion about what you think might be the potential benefits of a national urban policy for planning at the city and community scale. In that conversation, we could explore how federal involvement and investment in cities might look different if it took place within the framework of a national urban policy. For example, we could ask how the eventual housing strategy might look, how the eventual housing strategy might be shaped differently if there were civil society voices around the national urban policy table, reminding the federal government of its ratification of the 1976 UN International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. This covenant recognized the right of everyone to an adequate standard of living for himself and his family, including adequate food, clothing, and housing. The covenant included a commitment to take appropriate steps to ensure the realization of that right. And many countries have now embedded the right to housing in their constitutions. The federal government, as you have heard, participated actively in the Habitat III conference in Quito last October. Jean-Yves Duclos, the minister, was prominent himself, and his ministry conducted an online consultation to solicit views on the new urban agenda, and that material is still online. And I would like to just note that we have here with us today a Canadian planner who was one of the 10 experts on the policy group that developed the policy report on economic development, which was part of a number of policy documents that informed the new urban agenda, and that's Rod Regier, Commissioner of Planning Development and Legislative Services for the region of Waterloo. The 2016 Canada report prepared by Minister Jean-Yves Duclos' ministry for the Habitat III conference on Canada's progress since Habitat II 20 years ago has frequent references to cities and urban issues. Some of the statements give the impression that there is some kind of national urban framework. For example, the statement that Canada is committed to creating cities of opportunity for all as part of the Habitat III new urban agenda. The statement reads, this is verbatim from Canada's report. In the spirit of the new urban agenda, Canada is looking beyond bricks and mortar towards a people-centered vision for communities across the country. Governments and stakeholders are working together in 7 key areas to ensure all Canadians have healthy, sustainable, and prosperous communities. And there are 7 principles. 1, leaving no one behind. 2, fostering sustainable growth. 3, providing leadership in climate policy. 4, building a safe city for all. 5, supporting job creation for future prosperity. 6, building houses and basic infrastructure for a better future. And 7, working together in partnership. Canada will have to submit a report on its implementation of the new urban agenda for the Habitat IV conference in 2036. And what will it have to report then?